Okay, can we see the right thing?
We sure can.
Excellent. We're off to a strong start. Look at that. Okay, hi everyone. Um, so welcome to today's education session. We're all thrilled that you're here. And as we begin, I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. I invite attendees to put in the chat where they're joining us from today. So Queen's is the Cheer Project is housed at the Queen's University, which is situated on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. To acknowledge this traditional territory is to recognise its longer history, one predating the establishment of the earliest European colonies. It is also to acknowledge the territory's significance for the Indigenous peoples who lived and continue to live upon it. People whose practices and spiritualities were tied to the land and continue to develop in relationship to the territory and other inhabitants today. The Kingston Indigenous community continues to live to reflect the area's Anishinaabeg and Haudenosaunee roots. There is also a significant Métis community, and there are First Peoples from other nations across Turtle Island present here today. And I would also like to thank Jason Miller, and video conferencing services at Smith School of Business for providing today's platform and the technology and supporting this event today. And just as a reminder, the event will be recorded and available on the Cheer website. And for those of you who may not know about the Cheer project or who would like to learn more, the Canadian Collaboration for Child Health, Efficiency and Excellence in the Ethics Review of Research, Cheer, is a Canada-wide initiative on a mission to improve child health by streamlining research ethics review for child health research. Cheer is led by Clinical Trials Ontario and MySAN in partnership with Queen's University Faculty of Health Sciences, Office for Professional Development and Educational Scholarship, and investigators and collaborators across the country. Cheer is a CIHR grant-funded project, and as part of the project, we have an education component that aims to provide educational opportunities for researchers, administrators, REBs, patients and families to support high quality and efficient REB reviews. So that is why we're all here today. And you can find us online at cheerchildhealth.ca. Okay. So just kind of like to ground everyone, I'm just going to give a very brief overview of the project. As I mentioned, one of our deliverables is education supports. And in addition to today's event, we'll also be hosting a webinar next month, which I really encourage you all to attend. And it dives into pediatric patient perspectives and patient-orientated care. And you can go to our website, and if you click on the upcoming events page, there'll be details about that, and you'll have the registration button. I think it's going to be a really, really great webinar. We have some fabulous people from Sick Kids who are going to be doing a presentation for us, and they even won a CIHR Talks award a couple of years back. So definitely well worth seeing. So as I mentioned, one of our aims as the Cheer project is we want to improve child health in Canada by streamlining multi-site ethics approvals. And we do this by leveraging the STREAM system, which is run by Clinical Trials Ontario. And right now we have participating institutions across Ontario, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland. So you have the list there. And as I said, if anyone wants to learn more about Cheer, you can go to our website at cheerchildhealth.ca. Okay, so this is going to be a fairly informal session. Questions and your comments are really welcome. Please feel free to ask as we go along, or if you just raise your hand or shout out to me. We'll also have time for questions at the end, but we really want this to be interactive and helpful to people. So, like I say, just feel free to come off mute and contribute to the conversation, ask questions, that kind of thing. And for today, we contacted REBs in our working group network, and we found that what we asked them was, what are your top tips? What would you love coordinators and people putting together your ethics applications to know? And we found that the feedback was really, really consistent across the country. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to group this into key themes that we're going to go through. Because we know doing your ethics applications can take a lot of time. And if you're not really sure if it's your first or if it's a different style of ethics application that you're doing, it can be quite tricky. And so we really are here just to try and like help you along the way and try and give those tips and tricks that the community shared with us, so that hopefully, you know, as you submit your REB applications in the future, they can go, you know, you feel a bit more confident and you can go forward with maybe less back and forth and get those approvals, which is what we all want. So you can start research. Okay, now I'm going to hand it over to Megan.
So one of the first themes that emerged was all in relation to preparing and reviewing the application form submitted to the REB. And across the board, all the pediatric REBs in Canada mentioned communication. Communication is a big theme, really being able to receive that application and really reconstruct the research project from the information contained therein. And something that, you know, I think everybody on the call will probably understand is that even though it's obvious to you what the research is and what it's about, describing it to an outsider, including the members of the REB who are reviewing your application, it can be really, really tricky. When you have thought about something for a really, really long time, it can be really easy to miss small details because, you know, for yourself or your team, it almost goes without saying. But the trouble with an ethics application is if something's not contained within the submission, the REB is not really in a position to just make assumptions. So they do have to proceed with the understanding that maybe you've not thought about this. So something you may have put lots of thought into, but perhaps isn't really clearly communicated in the submission, you're probably going to get a comment back inquiring about if you've considered that piece of your research entirely, because it just might not be reflected. And sometimes we call this tunnel vision. I mean, certainly Miranda and I get this in the cheer research all the time, where you spend so much time making something and it makes so much sense to you, but then somebody without any prior knowledge or context, they can't understand what you're presenting. And for that reason, we really recommend finding somebody to proofread your application, whether that's just for communication style, but it can also be for finding those little gaps that you probably already have the answers to, but you just can no longer see because you've been working on your protocol or your submission for so long that it's ceased to be visible. Another thing that all the REBs mentioned was the concept of quality over quantity. So application forms sometimes give you big boxes where you could fill with multiple paragraphs to provide a response to some questions. But ultimately, you don't need to fill up all the response boxes in an application form. REBs are looking to see that you really know your audience. And so you should be tailoring both your patient-facing materials, whether that's for parents, that's for children and child participants, with language that's really appropriate to that audience. They're also looking to see minimal jargon in the submission that you prepare in the application form, and would much rather see like simple, clear explanations that are straight to the point instead of multiple paragraphs of text, especially copied directly from the protocol. Another thing that emerged was consistency, and probably something familiar to everybody here is that REBs are very good at, you know, looking at your entire submission and picking up on some of the incongruencies across different aspects of your submission. So that could be the protocol, it could be the consent forms, it could be some of the assent materials, and then it could be just details contained in the application form. So a top tip from everybody was to ensure that everything matches before you hit that submit button or resubmit. Something that I'm sure has also come up for other folks on the call is that version dates need to match the version dates that you report in your submission should match the version dates actually included on, say, the protocol or your consent form. And REBs do look to ensure that that is updated when, say, you resubmit or you're submitting for an amendment to something like your protocol or your consent form. This is helpful not only to make sure that everything that's on your approval letter is correct, but also just helps everybody keep track of all the details and make sure that we're responding to the most current versions of documents that are in use. The other thing that REBS did mention to us is that for every activity referenced, please make sure that all the related documents are attached to the ethics submission. So for example, you may be running a clinical trial with children, but for 25% of those children, you're looking to have a one-on-one interview, maybe over the phone, with their parents, just to understand the caregiver perspective of being involved in that trial. And so if you reference something like that in the application form, just be sure that you also attach an interview script, even though it might not be top of mind as the main component of the study. And another tip that we received was that it's very helpful when you're providing a response letter to REB provisos or the comments that you receive back from the Research Ethics Office to just include the date of those provisos. For something like a larger clinical trial where you maybe have a few provisos as you go through the REB approval process, it can be really helpful just for the ethics board themselves to make sure that they're looking at the most current response letter based on the most current round of review. All right. And one additional tip that we did receive actually was that incongruencies can happen when you are copying and pasting between previously approved submissions and then your current submission. And so some folks said that they most commonly see this where you've had an approved application for a pilot study, for example, and that pilot study has now transitioned into a phase 1/2 trial. So you're going to be copying some of the information across from your approved pilot study, but there are likely very small changes that have happened from your initial study into the current trial. And so, by all means, keep copying and pasting, but yet again, another role for somebody who can come in and proofread your submission, just to make sure any of those small changes to the protocol or something like the expanded, target for recruitment has been updated. So moving on from the application form into consent, we've grouped our first theme regarding the consent process as logistics, because really it's the nuts and bolts of the consent process that the REB is looking to understand. So generally speaking, it's the who, the what, the where, and the how that they're looking to understand so that they can really reconstruct the entire process of obtaining consent from participants or parents and substitute decision makers. Being extremely clear on this up front will help the REB understand things like power imbalances have already been considered by your study team and they've been addressed. The REB wants to know exactly how consenting procedures will also be done in practice at that specific site. This is an important detail in helping them understand the research at their location, particularly if you're doing a local REB submission. And so oftentimes a protocol may have some general information about how the consent procedures will work, but just including that information from the protocol is not quite enough. They really want to understand how that will look at your particular hospital or your particular institution. The submission should provide additional details. So if you're initially submitting for a multi-center protocol, that's going to be general and contain submissions for local sites thereunder. When you go to provide your submission for local sites, really do make sure that you provide extremely specific references as needed. So another theme, unsurprisingly, when it comes to pediatric research is capacity. And the research ethics boards that we're reviewing for pediatric research in Canada, they all stress that the TCPS indicates that capacity to consent should be considered rather than the age of majority. So most provinces in Canada do not have an age of consent for research, though there are some exceptions. So it is important for the REB to understand how and when capacity will be determined and who will make that determination. They also want to know, in relation to that, what options are going to be available to those participants. So for example, do you have assent materials and, are you prepared to have an assent conversation with participants who do not have capacity to provide independent consent? Do you also have materials or a script for obtaining consent from parents or substitute decision makers? And finally, however you're going to go through the capacity assessment and consent process, the REB is looking to see that mirrored in the consent and assent materials that you attach to your REB application, all the way down to what signature boxes are provided in your consent forms. In the context of clinical research, The REB also wants to ensure that the person that is determining capacity is qualified to do so. So, for example, a physician or resident. So be sure to be explicit on that. This is a case where more detail is better than less detail. And finally, as it probably goes without saying, consent requirements do vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction across Canada. So if you're ever unsure, please do reach out to your local REB who is reviewing in that particular jurisdiction. They'll be able to help you out, and they may also have guidance on their website. And I'm turning it back over to Miranda now.
Okay, so kind of continuing on that consent theme, we wanted to touch on kind of TCPS justifications. So waivers of consent, alterations to consent, they're fairly common in health research, especially if you're doing large chart reviews or you have a component of your research, which is a chart review. And what we heard is that it's really vital to know which article of TCPS you should reference. And if you don't ask, if you don't know, you can ask. And some applications will have like help text in the forms that will often say, if you are doing this, you need to use this article. So there's a handful, and they kind of do different things. So for example, with your traditional waiver of consent, what the REBs are looking for with all of these kind of requirements is for you to say point by point, using the TCPS article to justify why it is that they should grant you a waiver of consent. And like I say, you need to use the right TCPS article to do so. So for example, if you are requesting a waiver because you're doing a chart review, you're going to want to say the first point is that it involves no more than minimal risk to participants. So, you would say it's a chart review, which is a minimal risk activity, and that you are hoping to review as many charts as you can get your hands on. Maybe this is well up into the hundreds, and you would then want to then describe how this won't have negative impact on the welfare of participants. And so, like I said, just going through point by point to make that justification. And it's the same like if you would want to use secondary use of identifiable information. So that's the 5.5A of TCPS. And again, point by point, why you need to do this. And again, it just goes back to what we said earlier, trying to explain to an outsider what you know really, really well, trying to explain to them in really clear, direct language what exactly it is that you're wanting to do. And it's going to really help the REB to make that decision. Different consent models can also be used quite routinely in pediatric research. So for example, NICU research. So often there is no time between a baby being born and an intervention needing to happen. Sometimes it's literally like immediate. And so, stopping to do a consent conversation with parents after a birth is not the good thing or the right thing to do there. So, sometimes something like assenting parents verbally and then fully consenting them later when, baby and parents are stable is, perhaps a better way of doing things if that is the type of research that you're doing. And if they decide later on that when they're being fully consent that they don't want to be in the research, then all of their data can just be removed and destroyed. And this type of deferred consent can be really helpful when you're comparing like standards of care of research. Oh my goodness, standards of care is your research, just comparing those two standards of care. So for example, giving oxygen, the amount of oxygen that you give to a neonate requiring oxygen, that could be your research. So it's again, we go back to just being really clear as to why you're doing this model of consent and how it's going to work, the logistics of it, that kind of thing. And then just to touch on broad versus blanket consent, because again, this could be a point of confusion for a lot of people. And the nuances between these can be quite subtle. So the REB really want to ensure that participant privacy is protected to the extent it can be, and they're really attuned to these differences, which to someone on the street, broad versus blanket, they probably wouldn't know what that is. But so broad consent is definitely allowable under TCPS. And this, what broad consent is, it's reuse of research data, but within limitations or a scope. So there's like stipulations, and it really defines what those limitations are going to be to the extent possible. Whereas blanket consent is basically unrestricted use of research data, which is not really what we're after, because it doesn't really protect that participant's privacy. And so it's just, again, making sure there is a TCPS article for broad consent, and just making sure that you're really going through those and trying to answer point by point what it is that you're wanting to keep the data for, where it's going to go, all of those nuts and bolts kind of pieces of information that you are trying to explain to an outsider, the REB, about what you're wanting to do. And another thing that we heard from for the people we asked is that if you're doing a platform study, and so like say it's a big like network study and there's going to be multiple projects under the umbrella of this platform, we suggest saving your justifications. So like if you're doing a request for an alteration to consent, and this can be used across the different projects just for consistency. And I think that makes it easier to see kind of what is happening across those many projects under an umbrella. Okay. So just going on to like privacy, so privacy, confidentiality, and anonymity. What the ethics application really does is aims to like paint a picture of what data is being collected and what's going to happen to it, and the storage, linkage, that kind of thing. Again, really speaking to, can this outsider, the REB, reconstruct what it is that you're wanting to do with your data? And this not only is helpful to know, but it also helps really determine what privacy protections need to be in place for that data. Many institutions have retention policies, and actually many institutional libraries have services that can help you with your research data management. So this could be storage, repositories, or information on institutional and tri-agency policies to make sure that what you're doing is going to be compliant with those things. Now, the TCPS doesn't stipulate a storage timeline. So often data can be usable for future research. And so it can be kept longer or sometimes even indefinitely. And again, the REB they want to know in plain language, what's going to happen? What are you planning on doing? What do you think the future research is going to be? And often institutional data policies, like retention policies, they're just a minimum requirement. So for example, where we are at Queen's, it's 5 years, and someone at Queen's, if it's changed, correct me. And so if you do, so you have to keep your data for a minimum of that policy time. And if you do decide that the data could be usable in the future, then you just explain that in your ethics application. But if at that future point, you are going to be using that data again, this, please don't forget, this usually will require a separate ethics application just to use that data again. So some institutions have specific processes for this. They may have like slightly different application forms that you can do. And if you're unsure, if you ask your REB, they're going to be able to tell you what it is that you need to do to reuse that research data that you collected previously. And institutions, they often have these preferred or recommended platforms, and for good reason. It's because someone in the IT or privacy department has gone through the process of really vetting those platforms and making sure that they are at the security requirement that is required, security level that is required for that institution. So if you can use those recommended or preferred platforms, I would say do, just because they're there, they've been recommended for a reason, because they are considered to be better than perhaps some other things that you could get. And another top tip that we heard is clarity in privacy language is really important. So your terms need to match what you're describing. And I know in privacy, it's confusing. I will be the first to admit that's privacy language can be super confusing. And so just making sure that if you're saying anonymous, you really do mean anonymous rather than de-identified. those kind of things. So just, and if you're not sure, the TCPS has lots of definitions in their policies. And again, they're usually your REB can help you with this. And there's lots of help out there. So do tap into that. So I guess now we wanted to just talk about some general stuff, mainly things we couldn't chunk out into a theme. Really, one thing that we would, a lot of people said that contacting the REB beforehand, if you are in any doubt of what it is that you're supposed to be doing, it's going to be so much easier and quicker for you, for the REB, for your sanity, if you just ask rather than guess and having it sent back. And this is for initial submissions, as well as if you're responding to comments or provisos. Many REBs, they have like virtual office hours, or you can like book a meeting on their website. And so just having a chat with them, I think, can sometimes be super helpful just to kind of help frame things for you and just make sure that you really understand what it is that they are asking.
We also heard that there's just been a general increase in a lot of research involving apps or devices. And so if you're using a platform or an app or device that's not necessarily approved or recognized by your institution, they'd recommend contacting the REB first and foremost to find out if additional steps need to be taken before you can even get to the point of REB approval. And this will save you time, particularly if you're using, say, a commercial app or device instead of something that was developed exclusively for research.
And if you're answering questions in your application that based on the protocol, it's really important that you include the local perspective. So the REB doesn't really want to see things like sites may do this depending on local site capacity or requirements. That's not really helpful, if I'm honest. They would really like to know for you to tell them what's happening locally. And if you don't know, then maybe saying you don't know that's okay, or saying that this is something that we're going to deal with later in an amendment. But just having less kind of like generic language and keeping it quite specific to the site is going to be super helpful.
Now, there are many sites across Canada where the patient population and study participant population is multilingual, and where it is a requirement to have translated documents that are participant facing. Submitted either for the initial review or submitted as part of an amendment process within a particular timeline following your approval. So say 3 to 6 months post-approval, you'd be expected to have all your translated documents submitted. So just be aware if you're going to be recruiting participants in jurisdictions that do require English and French. And also to include that early on in your budgeting, the REB does want to make sure that you've actually budgeted out the ability to accommodate bilingual participants.
Yeah. And look, we have the same tip as we did on the last slide, which shows how doubly important it is. Okay. So we're just going to spend a little bit of time talking about a bit more specific to CHEER. So there are a few different research ethics harmonization systems in Canada today. And so we're just going to talk a little bit about the CHEER system. And this uses a single ethics review model. So for those of you who might have been using like CTO for a few years, this is going to be quite familiar. But what you may not know is that you can now include sites in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and that are participating in your multi-site study. And they can come in under the umbrella of that initial submission. So, for example, we know that a lot of our pediatric studies initiate in Canada at the larger centres. And so for those of you responsible for study startup at those centres, if you see that you've got collaborators, like say at the IWK Health in Nova Scotia or Janeway in Newfoundland, you can reach out to those centres about streamlining and their REB review, and they can be included in your application in the same way that you would include other sites in Ontario. And for those of you in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland on the call, the same thing applies. You can, if you know that you're going to have sites in Ontario, you can streamline your REB submissions to include them. So regardless of if you're using the CHEER platform, though, one of the things we've learned through as a CHEER project, and this is for any harmonized research ethics review system, coordination across all sites is really, really important. Sometimes one site can like jump the gun a little bit and start their ethics application locally, but another site's already planning on including them, that kind of thing. So yeah, multiple REB submissions happening independently of each other for the same protocol in the same system is not what we want. So for example, like, between Nova Scotia and Ontario, or like BC and Alberta with REBEX, simply because the different site teams aren't aware of who's doing what, who's been meant to be taking the lead. So just making sure that all sites know what the plan is going to be really, really helpful for everyone and save unnecessary ethics applications. If you're not sure if you can streamline some of your sites, reach out to us early on, and we are more than happy to help. And additionally, with this model, it uses a centralized ICF template. So we have our cheer template, which is available on the cheer website. Go and have a look at it. And this can be used across all participating sites, which eliminates that need to kind of get local templates and plonk what you're putting into a local template and adapt everything to those local ICFs. And with our kind of tip, one thing that we heard is that sometimes multiple sites can be under the umbrella of one legal institution. For example, Toronto General, Toronto Western, Princess Margaret are all part of the UHM. And so you don't need to add them all separately. You can just add them one. And if you don't know if that's going to be the case, reach out to us and we can find out. Okay. And for those of you working with sponsored studies, sponsors can be granted read-only or full access to the application in the cheer system. And this allows them to assist with the completion, and it may hopefully speed things up a little bit, might reduce back and forth communications relating to queries, that kind of thing. And they can see where the application's at and other things. For example, they can take care of AE reporting if they have full access. And in this model, all sites are going to have the same renewal date, and amendments can be implemented really, really quickly across all sites. And just go ahead, like as we kind of said, making sure that all the sites are coordinated and every site knows who's doing what is going to be really helpful with reducing any duplication of effort.
Now, we also heard some tips just about the process of resubmission if you're using Stream, whether that's Cheer or CTO. So very, very basic, but it's the first question, so it's often easy to miss. Certainly, we've missed it ourselves. And so the first question asks in an application form, is this a resubmission? And it'll have defaulted to no, because when you first initially provided your submission, that was correct. But when you are resubmitting, responding, for example, to provisos from the reviewing REB, you do need to change this response to yes. And this is important for two reasons. The first thing is that it bypasses requesting institutional approval for a second time. So before your submission went to the reviewing REB, it had to get approved by the institution, and that means that it could maybe sit in an inbox for a day or two. So that just can add to your timeline. Secondly, by changing the response to indicate that you are providing a resubmission, it actually adds an extra section to the application form, and it gives you a new place in the form to attach tracked change versions. And so otherwise, there's really no place in the form to add your tracked change documents and demonstrate the changes that you made if they were requested by your REB. Now, another tip is to make sure when you're uploading your new clean version, so maybe it's the second version of your informed consent form, make sure you delete the old versions. You're free to do this because the system actually archives your initial application. So that document is still preserved if there was any need for it. But that means the resubmission should only have the most current clean versions and then the track change documents showing the changes made between the initial submission and your resubmission. So how we can help. So Miranda and I are both available to provide system guidance and application guidance, whether you're a new user to Stream or just a new user to streamlining across multiple provinces. We can help you with tailoring your lead site application. And as Miranda mentioned, help you to have your site join an active study as a participating site and go through what it looks like completing the participating site application. And I think we've mentioned it a bit, but you can join immediately after a study-wide application has been approved, but you can also join at a later date. For example, there could be 2 or 3 sites running already in Ontario, Nova Scotia, and the folks in Newfoundland, for example, they might be interested in joining a month, a couple months, or even a year later, and that's completely okay. And it still allows you to participate in a streamlined, shorter local submission in the system. There are institutional and provincial requirements available for site applications, and we're happy to connect you to those documents that provide that information, both for Ontario and for sites in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. As Miranda mentioned, we do have a CHEER Pan-Canadian Interventional Consent Template, which could be used both within the CHEER Stream system, but it can also be used at other sites in Canada and accepted by REBs that review pediatric research. We did want to note that, yes, it's currently only available in English, but one of our next goals is to produce this in French, that it is available both in French and English as a starting point when you're developing your consent form template. I also wanted to mention that the consent form template that we produced is not appropriate for children's oncology group research. We're well aware that the COG studies, they have their own templates or a version of that template that is preferred by the oncology REB reviewing your research. So please do not feel the need to use the CHEER template for COG studies. Keep on going with what's preferred for your community of research. Now, we do have some new materials that we have been working on. So we have been working on a brochure, which is for families, so both children, their parents, and other relatives. And it's to help them with learning a little bit about research before they enter into that consent conversation with a study team. So we are producing this as both a paper trifold if you wanted to have something available in clinic or in your office, but we're also producing a digital, one-pager poster that could be shown up on a TV screen in a waiting room, for example. This is initially going to be published in English and in French, but we are currently working in collaborations to allow us to then translate it and have it published in Spanish, in Mandarin, in Arabic, and also in Inuktitut. So please stay tuned for that. We have produced this brochure in collaboration with some work initially done by the wonderful folks at BC Children's Hospital, and also in collaboration with the CHEER Patient Family Advisory Council. So this has been a sort of a joint effort, and we're excited to provide it to the research community. Something else that we are working on that is forthcoming, hopefully at the beginning of the new year, are assent materials or assent activities that are particularly tailored towards young children. So this is something that has come about in response to a need identified by the CHEER REB working group, which is REBs that review pediatric research across Canada. And so I'm sure all of the folks on the call who do research, they've seen written templates for assent forms for children, and that can work for children with the appropriate reading level who are able to go through a document with the study team. But for younger children, it's not quite suitable, particularly for those who are still, getting their grips with reading. And so what we've done is create different activities that can be done with children and maybe a member of their family or maybe a member of the study team, that they're engaging, that they're colorful, that they're fun, and that they can be customized to a particular study. So one material that we developed is an adventure map, really ideal for younger children, that takes them through the adventure of participating in a particular trial or type of research. And another is a storybook that gives children an opportunity to express what they're thinking and feeling, whether it's doing puzzles or drawing or coloring in. So we're really excited to bring those to you both in English and in French, hopefully in the new year. And Miranda, is there anything else you wanted to add
Yeah.
about the Ascent?
No, I don't think so. Right, I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen. Okay. So one thing that I really wanted to kind of reiterate what Megan said is if you are a new user to the Cheer system, please reach out to us. We are so happy to help, and we really don't want your ethics applications being held up because you're struggling to use the system or something is not making sense to you. So please reach out to us. We have guidance documents. We will inflict our help on you because we want our multi-site PED studies to be really successful because that's what Cheer is about. So does anyone have any questions or comments on what we've spoken about today? Again, just another plug for our webinar next month. It's November 13th at 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and you can go onto our website to register for that. It's going to be a really interesting one. I should say, if you do have any questions, we cannot answer questions about your specific ethics applications. But we know some people who can. That is your REB. So did anyone have any comments or questions? Not seeing any in the chat. Okay, no problem. So as Megan said, the Ascent materials will be released in the coming months. So please, they will be on our website. We will be telling the world about them through our newsletters. And we will also be hoping to host a webinar talking about Ascent in the new year. Oh, we have a question. So Holly asks, I'm curious if there is a benefit to moving ongoing projects over to Cheer approval to reduce the burden of amendments at various sites. Great question, Holly. I'm going to actually say probably not, because the process of getting them into the Cheer system would require an initial approval. So unless your project has changed dramatically in scope and you would need a new ethics application anyway, then absolutely. But please, did you want to like email us and we can talk more? I'm going to be super techie and put mine and Megan's email address in the chat, so that anyone can grab them.
We
So
should
there
say,
is
broadly
mine.
speaking, one thing that isn't easy to do at this point in time is take a fully completed submission that's been approved in, say, one local system. I know lots of institutions use Romeo, or there's like a Huron product that gets used a lot in BC and Alberta. Taking that and then putting it into a different harmonized system there's really no way to almost like drag and drop it and bring that approval with it. So if you have something that's existing and already approved, there isn't unfortunately a way to sort of take that existing approval and then start streamlining subsequent amendments.
Yeah. But for your new projects, we are here, and
By all means.
yeah, we are definitely available. Okay. So if nobody has any more questions or comments, we are pretty much at time, which is great because we actually thought we might go over with all of our content. And thank you, Paige. And if anyone has any questions that they think of that they wanted to ask, our email addresses are there. Please reach out. Always really happy to connect with people.
And then a final note, just because we did say we've got Ascent materials coming soon. If any of you do start to use these materials or try them out in some studies and you have feedback that would be really helpful from the perspective of either your participants or yourselves as researchers, we would be very open to hearing about how we can incorporate that feedback into sort of future versions of those materials. So please don't hesitate to share.
Thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.